Cool. Well, we are all set up.
Okay.
And we're ready to go. Hopefully, it won't get too crazy loud. It's a little early still, um, so I guess we should do like a little introduction thing. This is how professional and informal we are, I guess. But we're here at the Hilton lobby, hanging out, having a casual Austin time, South by Southwest style, with Jennifer Steinman, who is the director, producer, editor, craft services.
Totally.
For a documentary called Motherland. So why don't you go ahead and just give us a little explanation for what Motherland is.
Okay, well, Motherland is the document of a journey that we took a couple years ago. I took a group of moms who were, they were 6 American mothers who had all lost a child, and I took them to Africa to volunteer with children there, and we filmed the whole trip. So it's a lot about grief and healing, and the idea that volunteering and giving of yourself in service can be a healing thing to do. It's also about how to make a positive meaning out of a tragedy when it happens to you, and how to find some way to handle grief, which is a very universal human emotion.
Where did the idea come from first to take a very personal, focused grief and paint it within the backdrop of a universal grief or a universal problem?
Well, the personal came from one of the women in the film is actually a good friend of mine, and she had lost her son in a car accident. So I had been watching her going through her grieving process, and I had certainly known people that had lost people before, but I had never known anybody that had lost a child, and it was a very specific kind of grief. And then separately of that, I've done a lot of volunteer work in my life, and I was planning a trip to volunteer in Africa for myself. I'd been reading a lot about Africa, and then I was reading this book by Stephen Lewis, who was the former UN ambassador on HIV and AIDS in Africa, and he said in his book, I was reading this passage, and he talked about, think about how you and I feel when we lose one person in our life, and then think about a continent where almost every person has lost at least one person. And so I had, the reference point of my one friend going through her grieving process, and then thinking about a whole continent of people going through what she was going through simultaneously. And that was what really drew me to want to do something to help, and the idea of bringing together parents who've lost children with children who've lost parents, and also other people, not just orphan children, but all children and adults in Africa who are
just the daily, everyday plight of starvation or poverty that goes on in the area.
Exactly.
So this was a situation where 2 life events kind of coalesced together, right, around the right time for you to have this idea born. I think you mentioned even in the in sort of the opening narration about your friend a little bit. But how did you get hooked up with the 5 other women that were involved in the project? I mean, how do you put out like a wanted ad for, hey, have you lost a child?
I did, kind of.
Did you really?
I did. I basically sent a blast email to grief groups, counseling centers, children's hospitals, places like that, and describing my idea for the trip and what I wanted to do. And I was sort of thinking that I might get like 1 or 2 people that way. And what ended up happening was, in like a 48-hour period, I got about 100 emails.
Oh, wow.
And I got, and women were just sending me pictures, sending me stories, telling me all about their kids. I was actually in London at the time, and I was checking my email in Starbucks every day.
Yeah.
And I'm like sitting in Starbucks, and I'm sobbing my eyes out. And I'm like, oh my God.
So they thought you were like that crazy lady in the coffee shop that was just crying all the time?
Totally, yeah. And and it was just really moving, because obviously, I think the reason this trip appealed to so many women who lost their children was that it felt like a way to honor their child's memory. And that's what really drew them to it.
It's kind of an interesting response to me. Maybe not what I would find to be like the most natural inclination, the idea of honoring their child.
I think what a lot of them go through is, as painful as it is to grieve and to lose them, when the grief starts to let up, they get scared that means they're going to forget.
Oh, right.
And they don't ever want to forget their children. So any way to keep that child's memory alive and present with them at all times is really, most of the women I've met, that's a huge focus of theirs, is how do I make sure that I never forget.
Yeah, that seems like a pretty, now that I think more about it, a pretty common response to most all grieving. Whenever you lose someone, whether it is by death or even, losing a friend or, ending a relationship, that sort of thing, you go through this pain process, and the pain becomes the meaning of that. So as soon as you, you want to feel like you have this intense connection still to whatever it is.
Yeah, that's exactly it. That's exactly it.
Did you ever? I mean, this is sort of designed, but I'm not sure if this was right off the bat your intention. But there's definitely an idea of adoption that goes on in this process. Like right from the beginning, in the first day that they're working at this, children's school, you can see it. There's definitely a moment with Kathy, I think, in particular, where she's holding this child and rubbing its back.
Yeah.
And that scene, you can see this mother who's lost a child of her own, like almost adopt a new child in that moment.
Were you thinking that? You were thinking someone was going to end up with a kid?
No, not. I mean, maybe not like actually, literally ending up with a kid, but there's definitely a strong theme of them like.
Wow, you're the first person to say that to me. That's really.
Oh, really?
But that's super interesting.
Did you ever think about that going into it, or is it just something that?
I mean, I think because you hear all these stories in the media about, Madonna adopting a baby from Africa, or, and people do go and adopt children from Africa. There are certainly many, many children in Africa who need a home. I mean, I think we all got asked, like, are you going to come back with the kid? And, that was like, I got it, everybody on the crew got it, everybody in the film got it, but, I mean, that was, when we were there, that wasn't even an option or a thought, really. And most of the children we worked with, even if they had lost their parents, most of them were in kinship situations where they were living with grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, and I've even since gone back to Africa to do some other volunteer work in other countries, and there's a huge push right now to actually, by the villages, to actually not have orphanages because they sequester the kids and keep them out of the community, and so the idea is how can we support orphan and vulnerable children and yet still keep them in the villages, in their communities, and part of the group.
And there's certainly correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like there is a very strong familial kinship about the culture of Africa, especially South Africa. So I thought that was interesting to take 6 American women, where arguably in context with other cultures, our family unit, if you want to say, the ties that we have in a family unit or the way that we create families. I mean, certainly other cultures are very strong in that and maybe more strong than us. So to take those people out of their element and put them in a culture where the entire community is really a family. Did you learn anything from that you didn't expect? Or did you what was that like seeing that in action?
People ask me a lot, like, why did you go to Africa? Why didn't you go, there's lots of people in need here in America, and why didn't you do something here? And it's totally true, and I think a trip like that would be really valuable. And for this particular trip, I wanted to have the experience of exactly what you're talking about, of putting them in a situation and in a culture completely different than their own. Taking them completely out of their element and being, getting like a global perspective on grieving, basically. And yeah, like that was the lesson. That was absolutely the lesson. We had so much to learn from Africa about grief because, you read about the numbers of people dying there, and you assume that that there's going to be so much more sadness just based on the sheer numbers. And yet our experience there, and for the women especially, their biggest experience was, one of the first 3 days, I can't even tell you how many times I heard the words, everyone's so happy, everyone's so happy, why is everybody so happy? And they had, even though they technically have more grief than us, because they deal with it together as a community, because there is that strong sense of community, because it's not a taboo subject to talk about, because they have each other and they use each other in dealing with it, and there's no, they're open about it and honest about it. it's there's a, I don't want to say like a lightness to it, but there's it's easier. It seems easier. It seemed easier to all of us, for all of them, that it was like, to say to someone, oh, I lost my child, and have them go, oh yeah, me too, or my sister next door, or oh, you should talk to so and so, or oh, and they just run up and hug you. Whereas, in our culture, when you say to someone, oh, I lost a child, they go, oh, I'm uncomfortable. I don't know what to say to you. People.
Is that a disease I can catch, sort of?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Or like, I feel so bad for you that I don't know what to say.
I don't know how to respond.
I don't know how to respond, so I'm going to say nothing. And that's not the case in that culture. And so.
And that's another case of building community as well, of creating an extended family through shared experience, maybe.
Exactly.
Yeah, certainly this is, like you said, your experience in Starbucks, reading all these emails and crying a lot. This is definitely a movie that there's going to be a lot of crying going on, I think, in the audience. And judging by the reactions and the process that these women go through and the kind of lessons they learn, which happen some of them happen immediately.
Yeah.
And then others kind of take a while to sink in as they think more and more and more about what they're doing. It's easy to get a sense of their reaction, and I'm wondering if outside the documentary, though, the reaction to the trip was more mixed. If you had anyone involved in it that was sort of more negative, coming out of it, or if it was just a universally positive thing.
I think the trip was hard.
Sure.
It was long hours. We were going. They really were working, and it was exhausting. And I think if you'd asked people that question, after their 48-hour flight home, as they arrived back in the States, feeling completely, tired to the bone, and
right.
They might have been a little negative about it. But I think if you ask them now, what that trip meant to them. I think all six of them feel like it was an incredibly powerful experience. I mean, I think it's hard for anyone to see themselves in a film, first of all, and be objective about it, and to think back on it. There were hard parts of the experience. It was a very emotional trip, for sure. And some things that happened, of course, I chose not to include because, it wasn't the purpose of the film. It wasn't what the film was about. And but I think that all of them definitely felt like it was a life-changing experience and better for it in the end, no matter what.
Was there ever like a panic thought in your mind of sort of, what am I doing? I'm taking these 6 women and putting them in a foreign country, and
Yeah, I had those a lot.
There's a little bit of danger there, maybe.
Yeah, we had some moments. We only had to rush to the hospital once, so
Which can happen to every production.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, it was exactly. I'm not gonna lie, shit happened, but part of my process in narrowing it down from 100 people to 6 was, choosing women that, I just in my gut felt like these women are ready for this trip. Whereas I talked to a lot of women who, as beautiful and wonderful as they were, and as amazing as their stories were, I didn't feel like emotionally they were ready for this trip. And in fact, that's what ends up happening with one of the women that I did choose was, at the last minute ended up not being able to come, and her daughter came in her place. So, and that was why she just emotionally just.
And she realized it before leaving that she needed to opt out of doing it.
Yeah.
But her daughter does. Definitely adds a lot to the story, I think. So.
Oh yeah, I think so. In the end, at first I wasn't sure how it would work, and then I realized she actually brought another side of the grieving process that was really important.
Well, for me, it was kind of cool to see a younger person involved in the process.
Yeah.
So, but I did like that a lot of the mothers. There was an age range there that was fairly decent. I suppose to get a broad swath of responses.
Yeah.
So what's the next step for you? Are you already have a project lined up? Are you searching for whatever that is? Are you waiting for 2 things in your life to conflate to give you like the next great idea?
I actually just got an amazing lead on a new story as recently as last week. So I have it's a well, I probably shouldn't talk about it yet, but I am.
You totally should talk about it.
Well, I have a it's an inside lead at the New York Fire Department, and I'm gonna do a story about in time for the 10-year reunion of 9/11.
Very cool.
Reunion is not a good word.
Yeah.
Edit that out. The 10-year anniversary of 9/11. So that's and I'm looking for a producer and funding for that project. And then I have some other ideas too. My producing partner is Geraldine Pesanowski, who's also here with her film Mine, and
Who we talked to just the other day,
uh-huh.
just 20 feet behind us,
Yeah.
also in the Hilton lobby.
Right on. And so she and I have a couple projects that we are looking for, basically looking for money, as most filmmakers are. So we have some ideas that we want to get going on.
So if anyone has money out there,
That's right. If you have money out there, call me.
awesome. Well, thanks so much. I definitely appreciate the time you took to talk to us.
Yeah, thank you. This was awesome.